This episode of Precinct 444 is brought to you by T-Mobile for Government. T-Mobile is proud to support the law enforcement community through T-Priority, its commitment to providing priority connectivity when it matters most. You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Precinct 444. It's where we, as an organization, the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, try to put out topical, educational, interesting topics in and around the law enforcement sphere, and to provoke, hopefully, some questions and maybe provide some answers for our audience. As so many in our audience know, we, the Memorial Fund, have existed since our creation in 1984 entirely on donations. We are only able to honor our fallen heroes, tell their stories, and hopefully make it safer for the men and women out there doing the job by virtue of the programs and best practices that we either create on our own or try to push out on behalf of organizations all across the country. We're only able to do that very good and continuing work by virtue of people who support us, people and organizations, I should say. And one of those organizations is T-Mobile. They have become one of our leading corporate partners, and I'm incredibly thankful that they're willing to sponsor this very special episode. It's T-Mobile for Government specifically. And not only are they a valued corporate partner, they're also the sponsor of our broader psychological health category in our officer safety and wellness programs. And we are just incredibly grateful for their ongoing support. So thank you again, T-Mobile for Government. I'd like to start by saying, for those of you who do not know me, I'm Bill Alexander. I'm the CEO of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. I'm incredibly humbled to play even perhaps a small part in terms of recognizing and remembering our heroes and paying their deaths forward in terms of how, why, where they might have faced those fatal encounters, and hopefully coming up with some ways to help prevent such deaths in the future. I myself am a retired law enforcement professional. I spent more than 30 years in the profession before coming here. But I am a very small candle, paling in comparison to our guest today, who I suspect needs no introduction for our audience, but Gordon Graham, who is in his own right a lawyer, a risk management expert. He's the co-founder of Lexipol. He's a prior law enforcement officer himself and a professional speaker across a broad array of topics. It really is my absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Mr. Gordon Graham.
Well, thank you, Bill. And I'd also like to thank the good people at T-Mobile for Government. I've done a lot of work for them, and they are truly a class operation. And the products and services they deliver are light years ahead of anything I ever dreamed. You know, as a young cop back in 73, I wish we could do this. I wish we could do this. I wish we could do this. And now it's all reality. And the good people at T-Mobile are leading the charge on that stuff.
Well, you and I have met before. I think the first time our Venn diagram might have overlapped was very, very young in my life. I have told this story before. In fact, I've told it to you. But I am absolutely convinced that one of the seeds that got planted in my early life to interest me in a career in law enforcement was the show Chips. I remember so fondly sitting at the feet of my grandfather as he was sitting in his lazy boy, and he and I would watch Ponch and John together. And of course, I bring that up because you yourself were a Chips. I don't know if that's even appropriate lingo in California Highway Patrol lingo, but of course, you were a California Highway Patrol officer. And not only that, I know for a fact you were an extra, or certainly in the background of one or more episodes of that very famous show. And, you know, I can remember even then, not that I would have necessarily articulated it this way, but certainly some part of this feeling, this very, very strong feeling that men and women in uniform had the power, had the capacity, had the ability to really influence the communities in which they live, just from small interactions all the way up to stopping perhaps something way more dramatic. And I, again, am convinced that that helped carry through my adult life and got that spark in me to eventually join law enforcement in my own right. So that was the start of our story. But many, many years later, I was the commander of the training academy for the Prince George's County Police Department. This was in mid to late 2021. And we had a brand new chief come on board, Chief Aziz. And one of the first things he said was, Bill, I need you to get a hold of Gordon Graham. I need you to schedule a full day of training for every single senior commander on the police department. And at the time, I had never heard of the famous Gordon Graham. And I remember you and I went through several layers of back and forth of legalese and all the stuff. And eventually we got you there. And I have to tell you, you really did have a profound impact on me personally, but certainly the department, which came out afterwards. Chief Aziz said that was the best money the department had ever spent for management training. And just as one example for our audience who might not have had the ability or the pleasure to sit through your things, I remember in one exercise, you did it sort of rhetorically. You didn't actually hand out note cards, but you said, I want every commander here to just pretend that the entire department is sitting in this auditorium, and I hand out some blank note cards, and I say to everyone in the audience, I want you to anonymously write down the name of or the names of the people in this organization which you know are likely committing or have committed or the problem children of the agency in terms of harassment, maybe sexual harassment, maybe use of force, coloring outside the lines, violating some policy or procedure. I want you to just write those names down for me on these note cards. And then I'm going to collect up all of these note cards. Now I have them in my hand. And then you walked over and stood in front of Chief Aziz and you said, so Chief, how much will you pay me for this stack of note cards? How much is this worth? And your real point to the management there was that these so-called problem children, not that there are that many in any given organization, but the people in the organizations who are likely to cause some tragedy or cause some controversy, it's not that they are not known. That's the irony, is that everybody knows who the problem children are. And that really hit home for me. A couple of other, one other thing that you really taught me was that it's very easy to look out across the broad stretch of organizations and find those crises. Something's going on somewhere in the country or the world right now, topically then in law enforcement, where something has gone wrong. And how are you as a leader and an organization learning from those other mistakes? And so when I took the role here as the CEO, I did two things, just as, two among many examples of where you have helped change me to make me a better leader. One was I immediately took your personnel, your end of year annual report thing, created a sheet and asked my employees here at the Memorial Fund 3 questions. Are you familiar with our bias and harassment training policies? Do you know how to make a complaint should you become aware of such a violation? And 3, today, sitting here right now, are you aware of any such violations? And all of my employees now answer that very same questionnaire that you got me started on. And the other thing I've done since I've entered the nonprofit space, outside of the government, is I try to stay topically aware of whatever the crisis du jour is in the nonprofit space. And one of the first things I did when I became CEO, picking up from my predecessor, I was looking at the way our organization was structured. Well, first of all, I bet you can guess, Gordon, what is the number one thing that goes wrong in nonprofit associations, particularly in terms of CEOs? Could you guess?
Well, my guess is financially related.
That is it. 1,000%. The number one downfall of nonprofit organizations is the leaders of those organizations spending frivolously, going to fancy dinners, taking first-class flights, spending that nonprofit generated revenue in ways that lots of people outside the organization might find controversial. So the very first thing I did was I said to my financial officer, I said, I cannot approve my own expenses. You must approve every single one of my expenses. And if there ever comes a day or time where you feel like something is coloring outside the lines, you have my full support. In fact, I'm demanding that you go to the board and report any activity you otherwise deem suspicious. So those are just 2 examples of Gordon Graham influencing my later years in life. So you really have had a profound impact on me. And I use that not to necessarily tell my story, but I know for a fact you have had similar impacts across this industry over the last 50 or more years. I mean, there's just no question in my mind, absolutely no question in my mind, that you have not only saved careers, you have saved lives. And there's probably no way for you or I to quantify what that number is. But in my mind, that number is in the hundreds, if not thousands, in both of those major categories. So to say that you have had an impact on law enforcement is not doing it even close to justice. So again, I really thank you for your time. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I can't wait to dig in and hear your thoughts on some of the topics that we are going to raise today.
Well, Bill, you're very, very kind. And as you were saying those last words, I wish my mom was still alive. Um, I was a grave disappointment becoming a cop. And I think it grew on her over time. But to hear your words, if she was able to hear that, I think she'd be very proud. But thank you for those very kind comments. And you've got me sort of teared up already. I have been so fortunate in my career, and I am just so grateful to be able to do what I do. And comments like yours make me feel wonderful. But in my little world, I'm nobody. I'm just trying to fix things and make things better. This profession has been so, so good to me. It's time to pay back, and let's do something to make it better. So let me start with this. In addition to the things that you mentioned, I'm also a professor at University of Virginia. Dr. Brian Gustafson was a California guy, a cop, PhD, and I got a call from about 6 or 7 years ago, and he said, I'm starting a Master of Public Safety program at University of Virginia. Now, I have been invited to a lot of universities and colleges over the last 50 years to be a lecturer or a professor, and I've turned them all down, but you don't turn down Thomas Jefferson. And, I had known nothing about higher educational institutions, but I know University of Virginia and how it was founded and all of the tremendous work that Thomas Jefferson did. And I said, what an honor. And I built a program called Practical Applications of Risk Management in Public Safety Operations. My team teacher in that class is none other than the esteemed Michelle Wucker. And she is the author of a book called The Gray Rhino. These massive 5,000-pound beasts that are running right at us. We can see them coming, and we refuse to get out of the way. With that in mind, one of my newest lectures is entitled, Your Black Swan is Somebody Else's Gray Rhino. The Black Swan is another book that's on my recommended reading list by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. 1597, this Englishman goes down to Australia, and he sees this big black bird that looks like a swan, but in his world, swans are white. So he asked the Aussie guy, what kind of bird is that? It's a black swan, mate. To the Englishman, that was an unknown, something he had never, ever considered the possibility of a black swan. Fast forward to 25 years ago. 1 month after September 11th, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld was being interviewed by the news media. Secretary Rumsfeld, what's your greatest fear on this war on terror? My greatest fear are the black swans, the things we haven't even thought about yet. On the other hand, Michelle Wucker's great book, The Gray Rhino, they're coming right at us. I've studied this industry now in depth for 50 some odd years. I've been a member for 53 years, but 50 some odd years I've studied tragedies. There are 0 black swans in the world of American law enforcement. All of our tragedies, the injuries, the deaths, the embarrassments, the indictments, the loss of public trust, the lawsuits, none of these things are sneaking up on us. They're coming right at us. We can see them coming, and yet we refuse to get out of the way. Now, why do we refuse to get out of the way? Another book on my recommended reading list by Margaret Heffernan, Willful Blindness. She sums it up in chapter 1. Why don't people address these problems lying in wait? And the answer, in too many organizations, if you raise your hand and say, we have a problem, in the eyes of many people in the organization, you're the problem. So don't raise your hand. And this is particularly acute in government operations. And most of us are government operations on this call, because if you raise your hand and take that risk, you get paid X. If you don't do jack and ignore the risk, you get paid how much? Oh, that's right, X, same amount of money. So why raise your hand? And as a result, in too many government organizations, and sadly, in too many law enforcement organizations, mediocrity has replaced accountability. And the whole house of cards is falling apart. Dr. Tony Kern is all over my reading list. His greatest book is Going Pro, The Deliberate Practice of Professionalism. And the theme of the book is making excellence the norm, not the deviation, getting better and better and better at what we do. So that's my focus in life, is alerting people that bad things do not have to happen in this procession. A lot of our line of duty deaths are clearly predictable and clearly preventable. We can do things about those. And it's an honor to be here with you today to explain my thinking on what you're doing there at the foundation, what we're doing at Below 100, what I'm trying to do at various police groups that I talk to, is raising that standard, a rising standard of quality over time and well beyond what is required by minimum standards. Our public deserves better than minimum standards. Our personnel deserve better than minimum standards. Our profession deserves better than minimum standards. Anything you can quantify, anything you can measure, we got to be constantly looking for the next best way. So that's my foundation on how I think about things. The overall mission of everyone in public safety, everyone, is preservation of life, not just length of life and quality of life. And all too often we focused on our customers, our citizens. We need to focus internally also, taking care of our good people who do this great job day in and day out.
You're absolutely right, Gordon. Of course, here at the Memorial Fund, by virtue of the memorial, we track and catalog every single law enforcement line of duty death since the birth of this nation, on now almost 250 years. And sitting on the walls of our very sacred memorial right now are the names of more than 24,000 men and women who have died in the line of duty. And I've said so many times before that while the primary purpose of the memorial is to recognize and remember their service and sacrifice, certainly we also have an obligation to look at that data and sort of use that as a window into the how, where, why too many men and women are facing these tragic and fatal outcomes. How can we use this data to better learn, to look at those either knowns or unknowns or everything in between? How are our men and women dying, and what can we do to prevent such deaths into the future? So I'm incredibly gratified that you're out there singing this song and trying to get law enforcement leaders thinking about these very circumstances to try to prevent those deaths in the future. Because I think all of us in law enforcement, perhaps all of us in the country, but certainly everyone in law enforcement has, I would argue, an obligation to try to save such lives in the future.
Bill, you've been around for a while. How many times have you heard this? Bill, bad things are just going to happen. There's nothing you can do. Our job is so risky that bad things are just going to happen. Really? Nothing we can do? My first full year in law enforcement was 1974. Check your records. 285 line of duty deaths in 1974 across our great nation. And last year, below 100 says 97. Your data, because you incorporate other things in there, says it's actually 111. 285 to 111? 285 to 97? How did that happen? Well, Gordon, there's less cops than there were in 1974. There's more cops. Well, Gordon, there's less violence in 2000. No, there's more violence. How did we go from 285 to 97 or 111, whatever the number is? This is not a fluke. This is not an accident. This was very deliberate. You know, some very smart people were working on this way back in the 70s, and we got better and better and better at it. And then you guys came on board in the 80s, and then more people started studying data. We had more chiefs of police who were getting educated on why things go right and why things go wrong. So don't sit and tell me that there's nothing that can be done. We can do something, ladies and gentlemen. We can do something.
I absolutely agree. And you touched on just briefly, but I wanted to just sort of double click on this thought of below 100. So every single year we look at the data from the previous calendar year. And at the end of the year, we put out an annual line of duty death report. And you're absolutely correct. For 2025, we reported 111 deaths in 2025. But as you're very correctly noting, 14 of those deaths were related to officers who responded to the recovery efforts after the attack on 9/11. And 14 of those men and women obtained and later succumbed to illnesses related to breathing in the toxins and the bad atmosphere in and around New York following the terror attacks. And so I'm not in any way trying to diminish or take away from those 14 deaths. They're every bit as deserving of recognition and honor as any other officer who died in 2025. But if we're looking at the sort of causal events in 2025 that resulted in a death in 2025, the number of those deaths, as you correctly noted, was 97, which is below the number 100. Now, for those in our audience who don't know what below 100 is, can you help educate them and tell our audience why is this such an important metric, and how long have we been working towards this very long-term goal?
You know, Bill, you ask a question, and I'm a lawyer, so I get paid by the hour, so I will give you a complex answer. I have been standing in front of police audiences for 52 years, hundreds of thousands of cops I've lectured, and I've learned something. Give me 100 cops, 10 of them don't want to be there. This class is a waste of my time. 80, 85 are good people who will do what they're told. And then there's 5%, maybe 10%, who really care. They want to change the world. And by the way, most of the people listening to this podcast today are the 5%ers. They want to change the world and make things better. Dr. Tony Kern, in his great book, Going Pro, talks about the 3 levels of professionals. Level 1, you're a member. Level 2, you comply with the rules. And level 3, you're constantly trying to make excellence the norm, not the deviation. Now, why am I saying that? Because we are not learning from past mistakes. The 5%ers learn from past mistakes, but most people do not. And aside on this, 12 years ago, we had Ferguson, Missouri. Since Ferguson, I've been to 45 different states' chiefs of police groups around our great country. 45. And I've asked this question. How many of you have read the Ferguson reports? California, 1,500 chiefs of police in the room, 5 hands go up. Ohio, 300 chiefs of police in the room, 3 hands go up. Missouri, 200 chiefs of police in the room, 1 hand goes up. There were lessons learned in Ferguson, Missouri. In the eyes of the city manager, the primary mission of the Ferguson Police Department was revenue generation. That's a huge problem lying in wait. But we are not learning these things. You know, my company, Lexipol, many, many years ago, I encouraged them to buy policeone.com. I wanted a national forum where I could get the truth out to people, but very few cops actually access policeone.com. We are not learning from past mistakes, and we keep on making the same mistakes over and over again. You know, in our conversation before this taping, I talked about right side approaches. The CHP taught me in 1973 that right side approaches were much safer than left side approaches on a traffic stop. I have been building this into my lectures now for 52 years, the importance of right side approaches. So every now and then I'll be going through the channels on TV, and the old cop shows they have and all those things. And whenever you got a dash cam in a patrol car and they show a cop walking up on the left-hand side, I am always fascinated how this is going to end. And sure than heck, here comes this deputy sheriff, middle of nowhere someplace, walking up on the left-hand side of a car, and he's got his butt facing traffic. He's not even paying attention to the traffic. And a van, you see the van drift over on his dash cam, sideswipes him, rips his radio off his belt. He falls down. Oh my gosh. And then you watch the dash cam. He pulls himself up on the car, pulls himself up, looks at the van that sideswiped him, runs back to his car, fires it up, chases the guy down, gets him stopped, and does what? Walks up on the left-hand side. Were you dropped as a child? You just got hit on the left-hand side. We are not learning from our past mistakes. You know, my thesis in graduate school was on the mathematical relationship between close calls, mishaps, and tragedies. And the whole theory is out of H.W. Heinrich's work from 100 years ago. It's a good idea to learn from the tragedies. The better idea is to learn from the mishaps, the falls, the slips, the minor injuries, the property damage only, because they're 30 times more frequent and much less severe. The best idea is to learn from the close calls because they're 300 times more frequent with no severity at all. You know, so my thesis was on non-punitive close call reporting, an open forum where cops could talk about their mistakes without fear of discipline, without fear of embarrassment. I got nowhere with law enforcement on that 30 years ago, but I got the fire service interested in this. And now since 1998, we've had firefighterclosecalls.com, an open forum where cops from around the country can talk about their close calls without fear of embarrassment. Where firefighters around the country can talk about their close calls without fear of embarrassment, without fear of discipline. On the police side of things, we've got leonearmiss.org, and very few cops visit that, and very few share their information. We are not learning. Your black swan is somebody else's gray rhino. Just because it's new to you does not mean it's new to our profession. We need to learn from these tragedies, and sadly, we are not learning from these tragedies. And they repeat over and over and over again, and quite frankly, I'm fed up. I am fed up. Bad things do not have to happen.
I absolutely concur. Circling back on that number 97 being below 100 has been such a long-term target goal of law enforcement. Shoot, for the better part of hell, maybe in the history of the profession, but certainly over the last 6 or 7 decades. To some degree, I might say to some degree, maybe law enforcement leaders and organizations have been looking at these examples that you're talking about. But what is frustrating for me, and I'm sure equally frustrating for you, is that every single year we continue to catalog deaths in these categories, exactly like, someone who is on the driver's side of a car and gets sideswiped by a motorist driving, 80 miles an hour and smashes into a guy or girl who would still be alive if they had just been on the passenger side of that car. So it's not that the profession writ large hasn't learned at all. It's just that we are not learning fast enough, or we're not even paying attention to the lessons that we otherwise should be learning. But
the 5%ers are learning, Bill.
Yeah.
5%ers. But remember, that leaves many percent that are not learning at all. My pet peeve, and I know we'll get into this in a little bit, is seatbelts. Seatbelts. If we just caught cops all wearing their seatbelts, we would have been below 115 years ago. But, cops don't wear their seatbelts. Now, why don't they wear their seatbelts? Arrogance, ignorance, and complacency. Arrogance. I'm not wearing it. Ignorance. I don't think it works. Complacency. I haven't had a problem yet. And I've actually had cops tell me that if you wear your seatbelt, you're going to get assassinated by a Ninja Turtle at an intersection because you can't get out of the car quick enough. Okay, let's check the data. How many have been assassinated by Ninja Turtles at intersections because they couldn't get out of the car quick enough? Oh, that's right. None. Well, you got to be able to get out of your car quickly. If you practice with it a little bit, you'll be able to get out of the car very, very quickly. I was doing a ride along with one of my young cops. This is not a joke, Bill. And I said, why aren't you wearing your seatbelt? He said, it's broken. I said, then get rid of the car. Get a new car. That won't do any good, sir. They're all broken. So all the seatbelts in all the cars in central Los Angeles are broken? Yes, sir. Show me how it's broken. This is no joke. This is a cop with a gun with bullets, puts the seatbelt on, grabs the shoulder strap, and starts pulling it out. This ain't stopping nothing. I can hit my head over here. I can hit my head over. Son, have you ever heard of an inertia reel? Oh, no, sir, I don't fish. And son, put your seatbelt on. Let me show you something. And I got him accelerating the car, slam on the brakes. So this was before ABS. The car slides to a stop. The seatbelt held him right in place. And my young cop has got this look of utter shock on his face. How did it know? Well, I don't know, son. Maybe it's built by the same people who build the thermos bottles. Somehow it just knows. And I was so disappointed in this kid. I said, wear your seatbelt. And it's not going to be fair to do a ride along with you today because I'm already biased that you're not that bright. And that's going to adversely impact everything. And I got out of his car. I walked back to the office and I was so disgusted, I went home. 13 hours later, I'm teaching a class for a major law enforcement agency in a city named after some angels. And that's all I'm saying. And I started on the easiest way to endear yourself to LAPD. Oh, it slipped out. The easiest way to endear yourself is start off with a CHP joke. I'm doing a ride along one of my cops yesterday. He's not wearing his seatbelt. I said, put your seatbelt on. He says, it's broken. I says, then BO the car. They're all broken. Show me how it's broken. And I show you, he's pulling the shoulder strap. 50 hands went up in this room. We got the same problem with our cars. No, come on now. Seatbelts, they work, but only if you're wearing them. The arrogant, the ignorant, the complacent, those people trouble me.
Oh, that is, I had not heard that version of your story before. That is really troubling. I would share with you my department story. The Prince George's County Police Department, we lost the better part of a half dozen officers. While I served for 25 years, we lost 16, happened to be all men who died in the line of duty, but at least a half dozen of those were traffic related accidents. And time after time after time, one or more of them would not be wearing their seatbelt. And it really, really did become this really, a really potent cause, a really important cause on the department. The then Assistant Chief Kevin Davis, who you probably know, who's now the Chief of Police of Fairfax County, and at the time the Chief of Police Hank Stawinski, they said this entire agency needs a cultural shift, and we are going to create a program that they called Arrive Alive. And what they did was they took the most recent officer who had died, they took his cruiser, they put it into the evidence bay, and every single police officer in the entire agency, as part of their in-service training, had to go to the evidence bay where they sat and heard the story of this officer, looked at the car crash, heard the senior leadership of the organization say how ridiculous it was that men and women in this agency weren't wearing their seatbelt. And then they mandated that every single car in the entire fleet, including the undercover cars, had to put a sticker on the glove box, highly visible while you're sitting in the car. And this sticker was very simple. It said, "Arrive alive," with a picture of a seatbelt. And all the undercovers and the detectives, they were all kvetching and complaining about, well, sometimes I use my car undercover, or I have people in the car and I don't want them to know on the police or the sticker. And the chief said, "We don't care. Our number one priority is not to go to another funeral for another police officer who could still be standing here but for the fact they had their seatbelt on."
Yep.
And the agency, to my knowledge, has not had another non-seatbelt death since they took that thing. So, some people out there are hearing your message and extrapolating on it, but I'm absolutely dismayed to hear the stories of my seatbelt doesn't work because the inertial retention is not working. That's just heartbreaking.
I graduated law school in 1982, and my graduation present to myself was a 1982 Saab Turbo. I was always fascinated with Saab automobiles. They were manufactured in the same plant in Sweden as they made Viggen fighter planes. And the Saab was a very safe car. And I bought the Saab, and I really, really enjoyed the car. Well, I was much less mature than I am today. My personalized plate on my 1982 Saab was Shyster. And I thought that was pretty funny. And so I'm washing my car out in front of my house one day, and a neighbor comes walking down the street. My wife and I got married in 82, and we moved into this condominium complex, and a guy comes walking down the street, old guy, and he says, "I take it you're a lawyer." I said, "I am." And he pulls out a stack of $100 bills, and he peels off 5, and he says, "Attorney-client privilege." I said, "Okay." He said, "I got a lot of lawyers who work for me, but this has to be confidential." I said, "Okay." And he says, "I need a divorce." And I said, "Okay, I do divorces. How much does she get?" And I said, "Well, how long have you been married?" He said, 40 years. And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Essentially, if you want to know how much she's going to get, you can divide by 2. And he says, "We've got 4 houses." I said, "Well, that's easy. That's 2. He said, "We've got 6 cars." And I said, "You're making this very easy. That's 3. And then he says, "She gets half my pension?" And I said, "Yeah." "She gets $1 billion? $1 billion? Now, I've been doing police divorces for a couple of years, and pensions are in the hundreds of thousands. I said, "You have a pension worth $2 billion? He said, "Yeah." And I said, "How'd that happen?" He goes, "I'm president of United Parcel Service. And I started 50-something years ago, and they kept on giving me stock options and stock options. They doubled, they tripled, they doubled, they tripled, they tripled, And then we went IPO 4 years ago, and I'm worth about $2 billion. And I said, "You know what? I think you'd be better off, falling back in love or something, And I had a chat with him. But he liked me, and he started bringing me into UPS to do work for UPS. So one day we're going out to dinner, and there's a UPS truck in front of us, about 5 cars in front of us. And he says, "Gordon, I bet you $100,000 that driver's got a seatbelt on." And I'm not taking the bet because I'm not stupid. And I accelerated up, and we looked in the open door of the driver, and he had a seatbelt on. And I said, "Wow, you're right." He says, "If you get caught sitting in a UPS truck without wearing your seatbelt, you're fired. You're fired." And, I would like to tell every chief of police and every sheriff who's listening to this, if people don't wear their seatbelts, fire them. Well, Gordon, they'll probably get their job back. I hope they do. But you got to send a message that this is not nonsense. This is not pie in the sky. Maybe if we all pray together, it'll work. This stuff works. I'm alive times 3 because of seatbelts, 2 on duty and 1 off duty. But for the seatbelt, I'd be dead. And yet we can't get this message across. We've got to get our people wearing seatbelts. It is just that simple. As a matter of fact, they don't even call them seatbelts anymore. They're called restraint systems. My graduate work prior to law school was in the Institute of Safety and Systems Management. It's a system. It's properly designed. It's up to date. All you got to do is wear it. And you've got to address the arrogant, the ignorant, and the complacent. Those people who think these rules don't apply to them, they need to be woken up on this, because that's a big deal.
Well, you're absolutely right. Every single one of those traffic deaths that we report on every single year is absolutely, all line of duty deaths are heartbreaking and tragic, but the traffic ones particularly, because I look at that data and I go, some number, maybe all of that number, they might be still alive if they had perhaps done something different, if we had incorporated into training better, whether it's a passenger side approach or wearing your seatbelt or, being out on the roadways, implementing things like stop sticks. When you're trying to do every single year, almost someone dies trying to deploy a stop stick. Just every single one of those deaths, you just go, gosh, I bet I could have prevented that.
You alluded to this in your comments. If somebody wakes up this morning in any one of our 50 states and says, I'm going to kill me a cop today, they are going to pull it off. It is very difficult to stop external intentional misconduct. If somebody wakes up this morning and says, I am going to kill me a cop today, that's my goal, how do you stop that? You can't stop that. In a free country, it is very difficult to prevent external intentional misconduct. And we will always have bad people attempting to kill cops and kill cops. But these, and I don't know how much you can do about that, but these traffic collision deaths, we can do something about that. We can do something about that. These roadway incursions. Hey, here's a vest for you to wear at nighttime. I'm not going to wear no vest. I don't want to be sniped at. Well, let's check the data. How many cops have been shot because they had a protective vest on? By the way, Bill, have you ever wondered why local cops wear blue and county sheriffs wear a lighter color, green and tan, and state troopers wear a brighter color, tan or gray or something brighter? Increasing visual conspicuity. The increase of visual conspicuity, Los Angeles Police Department does not have patches on their uniforms, except for the traffic cops, and they've got these massive patches, white, that reflect. Increasing visual conspicuity is absolutely essential to prevent these roadway incursions. I want you lit up. The Florida Highway Patrol, oddly enough, is the vanguard in this area on lighting up scenes. And I'm giving some advanced information on this, but I've talked to a number of people in FHP. So what's better? Yellow lights, blue lights, red lights, white lights? Well, they all have some function. If you really want to protect people, my dream is tethered drones. Tethered drones. Have a police SUV come in with a tethered drone, send it up with 1 million candle power, and light up the entire scene. You light up the entire scene. That is the best way to protect our people from roadway incursions.
Wow. Well, I'd love to see that technology. Well, listen, you and I both know.
Somebody's going to come up with it.
You and I both know that there are lives to be saved every single year. And the more such lives that we can save into the future, the greater the reductions in terms of line of duty deaths every single year. So I hope our audience is hearing what you're saying. And I know you could keep going on this topic for hours and hours. Another topic that you talked about in the training I sat through, and I definitely know you could talk for 8 hours about this, but touch on the two topics of first line supervisors and field training officers. Why are those two roles specifically so important in the police world?
Well, you worked at a police department. On any given day, did anybody know where the chief was? No. The chief's at a meeting, the chief's over here. Can anybody tell me where Sean Deary, the commissioner of the California Highway Patrol, is today? No, nobody knows that. Nobody knows where Bill Bratton is. Nobody knows where Sheriff Luna is. Does everybody know who their sergeant is? Oh, yeah. And will some cops modify their behavior based on which sergeant is on duty? Yep. My blanket statement is this. You show me a tragedy in American law enforcement today. The injuries, the deaths, the embarrassments, the loss of public trust, the lawsuit. I'll show you approximate cause of X, whatever. The real problem lying in wait all too often is a supervisor not behaving like a supervisor. Or in the alternative, a supervisor who tried to behave like a supervisor and got no support from management. If either of those is present, that is a huge problem lying in wait. So how do we promote people? We announce a test, we give a test, we establish a list, we take people off the list. So we promote this woman, we promote this man. A month later, they figure this out. Whoa, I got to confront people. I got to challenge people. I got to honestly evaluate people. I got to tell people not to do things we were doing when we were working together. I'm not into this. So what do they do at that point? Do they come up to the chief and say, I made a huge mistake in this promotional process. Give me my old job back and make me look like a fool? No, they stay in grade for how long? Forever. And the best we get out of them is mediocrity. Maybe there's a better way to promote people. Maybe there's a better way. How do we select our FTOs in too many organizations? Oh, yeah, he's great. He's a hard charger. He writes a lot of tickets. He takes a lot of people to jail. He knows gang violence. We're going to get... No. Maybe the best FTOs are not the hard chargers. The best FTOs are the ones who sit back and say, these are the rules. Management builds the rules. Management keeps them up to date. Your job as an FTO, and then later on in your career as a sergeant, is to enforce the rules. And the role of cops is to follow the rules. Design, updated implementation, and getting people to follow rules is so important. It's absolutely critical, the FTO cast. And when an FTO shows up, and I hope this is dead, but I have a feeling it's not. And that brand new recruit fresh out of the academy gets in the patrol car and the FTO turns and says, forget everything you learned at the academy. Forget everything you learned. I'm going to show you how to be a cop. That's a huge problem lying in wait. And by the way, if that statement is accurate, then you got a problem with the academy. We need a thread. We need a thread from start of career to end of career where we focus on the things that end up getting us killed, getting us indicted, getting us fired, getting us sued, all of these things, because they're not sneaking up on us. Those are the ones we need to focus on, and those FTOs need to enforce that. You wear your seatbelt. How can you write people citations for not wearing seatbelts if you're not wearing your seatbelt? How can you write people citations for reckless driving when you're driving recklessly? It's an ethics thing. We've got to get those FTOs and those supervisors. Supervisors are the key. And I can talk time and time again. You kicked off this thing, you mentioned job-based harassment. What's the most common lawsuit on job-based harassment is hostile work environment. What's the definition of a hostile work environment? Severe, pervasive pattern and practice of misconduct directed at protected class status. How can you have a severe, pervasive pattern and practice of misconduct going on in the workplace if supervisors are behaving like supervisors? The California Highway Patrol, I was proud to be part of that organization for 33 years, and I'm still tied to it. They have a brilliant pursuit policy. It's brilliant back in the 80s and 90s. How do I know that? I wrote it. It was brilliant. It was properly designed and it was up to date. Then why do we keep on getting in trouble in pursuits? Because nobody followed the policy. It is maddening. It is absolutely maddening. We'll just switch sides for a second. We've got 15 firefighters right now around America under criminal indictment right now for manslaughter or murder. Intersection collisions. So the policy on the fire department is if you're rolling on a call and there's a red light, you come to a complete stop, you check both ways, and you proceed with caution. But if you have a culture in your fire department known as first in, we got to be first in. If you're not first, you're last. All of a sudden, that policy morphs into slow down a little bit and maybe we'll get lucky again. Well, you cannot rely on luck. You have to rely on systems. And who gets in trouble? The apparatus operator is the one that's going to go to prison. I'm looking at the right front seat. That supervisor, that company officer. This firefighter is going to prison because you were afraid to enforce the laws. And if you promote people who can't or won't enforce policy, if you promote people who can't or won't have that courageous conversation with their employees and change their direction before they end up dead, fired, or indicted, that is a problem lying in wait, and that's on you. How do we promote? How do we select? How do we mentor? How do we train? How do we develop? How do we monitor our supervisory component? That is so critical for chiefs and sheriffs to do.
Wow. I could just keep listening to you all day, talk about all these topics, well, we've touched on a bunch of stuff. Below 100 officer deaths, learning from those deaths. We talked about traffic safety. We talked about supervisors and FTOs. Is there something you would like to leave our audience with to ponder into the future? Some thoughts that we haven't touched on already that you think are important, at least to bring up and get people enticed to learn more?
Well, one thing that I want every cop to know, next time you see a paramedic, Say thank you. You want to know one of the big reasons line of duty deaths have decreased are paramedics. Those pre-hospital care people, they really do an excellent job. I rolled on a lot of incidents where cops were major hurt back in the 70s, and you're standing there saying, he's not going to make it, he's not going to make it, he's not going to make it. And they didn't. And then the paramedics started showing up, and they do remarkable work. You see a paramedic, say thank you very much, because they're doing a lot of work. But what I want everybody to leave with is this overall concept of what your foundation is all about, what I'm trying to do, what Below 100 is all about. Bad things do not have to happen. We can do something about this. And it's up to you and each of you to go back and behave this way yourself, talk to your coworkers about this stuff. And when you promote, I want you to create an attitude in your workplace that this is unacceptable behavior to not do this. Bill, I'm long retired, 20 years retired as of this year. As I mentioned, I still have ties to the CHP. So I go to retirement parties, I go to funerals, I go to different events, and I'm on the board of directors for the CHP 1199 Foundation. And I sit down at a table of people I don't know. Hello, I'm Gordon Graham. And I had a young man shake my hand within the last year at a retirement dinner. I said, I'm Gordon Graham. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, sir, I worked for you in 1985. I thought, oh, God, I'm so embarrassed. He said, no, I understand. You had 30 cops coming in every 3 months in central Los Angeles. We're overrun with cops. They last a year. I lasted a year and I left. And he said, but I did work for you for a year, sir. The question I ask everybody who said they worked for me, the question I ask is, did you like me? Nope, I don't ask that question. Did you hate me? I don't ask that question. Was I a good sergeant? I don't ask that question. The question is, did I treat you fairly? Did I treat you fairly? Whether they like me or don't like me, that's not the issue. Whether they think I was a good sergeant or a bad sergeant, it's not the issue. Did I treat you fairly? And this kid smiled at me and he said, sir, I came in from another agency, so I already knew sergeants. You were different. I couldn't quite figure you out. And then I figured it out one day. You really cared about me. You really cared about me. You wanted me to be safe. And he says, you did some things. You called me out of a couple pursuits. You did this. And I got to thinking, why do you do that? He really cared about me. And that is the greatest compliment when one of your cops says, I know you really cared. We talk about preservation of life with our great citizens, but let's bring that attitude internally. And you got to love your people so much. You're not going to let them get dead, fired, or indicted. And that's the key role of that supervisor, chief selecting great supervisors, and have an attitude in the organization of continuous improvement. Bad things do not have to happen.
Well, Gordon, you're absolutely amazing. I wish I could talk to you for the next 6 hours. I would never tire of your insights and your anecdotal stories. I think, before I close out, is there any way that you prefer for people to find you? They want more Gordon Graham. The department wants you to come out and do the same training you did for PG. How can folks find you or get in touch with you?
Well, the easiest way is through Lexipol, lexipol.com. My email address at Lexipol is ggraham@lexipol.com. My personal email is gordongraham@earthlink.com. Yes, Earthlink. I'm old. That preceded AOL and Roadrunner, but gordongraham@earthlink.com. And if you send me an email, I'll send you an email back. If you have a phone number in your email, there's a high probability I'll give you a call and see what's going on. Well, Gordon, why would you do that? When I kick off my University of Virginia class, I give everybody my email and my personal cell phone. And they said, and they call. They said, I was just checking to see if you really gave me your cell phone number. I'm long retired. When they call me and ask me a question, I am learning also. So I will learn more from them than they are learning from me. And then I can develop strategies and tactics to address their question and then spread that question to the rest of the field that I talk to. So I would look forward to talking to you. ggraham@lexipol.com is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. And certainly visit my website, lexipol.com.
Well, Gordon, I'm going to finish with another story. And part of the training, if I recall correctly, you told us that early in your career, people referred to you as a loon, as a crazy guy, right? And I think you even mentioned that your wife bought you some sort of loon statue that you probably still have somewhere in your home office.
I still have it. If there's a video, I would show it to you. He's a loon. He's alone. I've learned something, if you want to find out what's going on in an organization, go to the bathroom. Pick a stall, any stall, just sit down, put your feet up and listen. And you will learn fascinating things in the bathroom. So I'm sitting in the bathroom one day and in comes walking the captain and the lieutenant, and they don't know I'm in there. And, and there was a couple of adjectives in front of it. He's a blank, blank loon. He's a loon. And I later on in life learned that they had written some things. He's a loon. And so Mrs. Graham and I were up in Calgary at the Lake Louise. And there was this beautiful jade statue called the Loon. And it was hugely expensive. But I told my lovely bride, well, make that my Christmas gift because I want that in my office to remind me, the Loon. If you break the norm, if you act differently, all of a sudden you're the problem. I wish we had more loons in the world who are thinking differently.
Well, it's funny you use those words, think differently, because that's exactly why I brought up this story about the loon, is because even as I was sitting through your class, I was immediately thinking of, I myself am something of an Apple nerd. I love all things Apple computer. Steve Jobs came back to Apple Computer after being fired unceremoniously many years before. And in 1997, they put out a brand new campaign, which they called Think Different. And you have probably heard this quote before, but it so reminded me of you, not only you telling the story of, people behind your back calling you a loon, but also the sort of combination of everything that you were describing and trying to teach us as we were sitting there. And if you'll indulge me, I want to read this campaign. It says, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And you, Gordon Graham, in my mind, there is absolutely no question, have changed the world. Certainly you have changed the world of law enforcement. So I said before, I am absolutely convinced you have saved careers and certainly saved lives. I, as a retired law enforcement member, am immensely grateful for what you have done and what you are doing to this profession that I hold so dear, and saving the lives of my peers, trying to keep their names off of our very sacred walls here at the memorial. I could not be more grateful for your service and your sacrifice. And I hope to some degree this podcast has planted a seed with someone who will be equally as crazy and try to bring their agency, their organization, their peers forward in the same way that you have for yours. So, Gordon Graham, thank you again. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank again T-Mobile for Government. It's without their support, we could not do this podcast, and without the support of so many across the country, both organizations and corporate partners and individual donors, we as an organization would not continue to survive. So, Gordon Graham, thank you again.
To all of you, good luck, good health, goodbye. God bless you. God bless America. And please keep your soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and Coast Guard personnel in your prayers tonight. Without them, this nation would be in a much bigger mess. Go back and let's work safely. Make excellence the norm, not the deviation. Thanks, Bill. Gordon Graham, signing off.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better.